The night had settled gently over Hogwarts, wrapping the ancient castle in a quilt of silver moonlight and soft shadows. The towers stood still against the star-scattered sky, their spires like quiet sentinels keeping watch over the sleeping grounds below. Far in the distance, the forbidden forest whispered to itself, its dark canopy swaying ever so slightly in the night breeze. The black lake reflected the moon in shimmering ripples, the water's surface so calm it could have been a mirror to another world. Inside the castle, the corridors glowed with the faint, warm light of floating candles. The air carried a comforting scent, a blend of old parchment, polished wood, and the faint traces of herbs drifting in from the greenhouses. The portraits along the walls dozed in their frames, their painted eyelids lowering as if the weight of centuries had caught up with them for the evening. Somewhere far away, a clock chimed softly, its mellow tone echoing up through the stairwells like a lullaby for stone and magic alike. This is where our story begins, not in the grandeur of a great feast, nor in the chaos of a Quidditch match, but in the quieter spaces of Hogwarts, where magic hums low and steady beneath every stone. Tonight's tale is a journey into secrets long buried, a mystery that began long before Harry Potter's time, before Dumbledore, before any living soul walked these halls. It is the story of the four founders themselves, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin, and the diaries they kept. Not diaries as we know them, but enchanted tomes that recorded their thoughts, their dreams, and their fears in ways ink and parchment never could. These diaries were never meant for the eyes of students, or even for the headmasters who followed. They were hidden, locked away behind layers of enchantments, deep in the folds of the castle's shifting passages. No one knew if they still existed. Some believed they had crumbled into dust centuries ago, their magic spent. Others thought they were nothing more than legend, a bedtime tale whispered by portraits to first years eager for stories before sleep. But sometimes, Hogwarts itself decides that a secret is ready to be found. So, settle in and let your thoughts quiet. Listen for the soft creak of the castle's ancient timbers, the hushed rustle of enchanted tapestries. Somewhere in these still hours, a door may open that has been closed for centuries, and a path may appear where there was only wall before, and if you follow it, you might just find yourself holding history in your hands. In the quiet glow of the Gryffindor common room, the fire burned low, casting long, lazy shadows across the walls. The armchairs looked especially inviting tonight, their worn cushions molded perfectly to the shape of countless evenings spent by the hearth. It was here, with the world beyond the tower wrapped in night, that three familiar figures gathered. Harry Potter sat forward in one of the deep chairs, elbows on his knees, his glasses catching the firelight. There was a thoughtful crease between his brows, the kind that meant his mind was turning something over, weighing it carefully before speaking. The lightning scar on his forehead, faint in the dim light, seemed to almost disappear, leaving behind just the boy who had grown into a young man, accustomed to the weight of secrets. Across from him, Hermione Granger had claimed the corner of the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her and an open book balanced on her lap. The book, as was so often the case, was enormous. Its leather cover worn smooth, its pages edged with the faint gold of age. Every so often, she would brush a strand of hair behind her ear without looking up, her eyes scanning line after line with quiet focus. But there was a spark in her expression tonight, a kind of suppressed excitement that hinted she had found something worth sharing. Ron Weasley lounged in the opposite armchair, one long leg stretched toward the hearth, the other bent lazily. He toyed with the end of his wand, spinning it slowly between his fingers. Every now and then, he'd glance at Hermione's book or at Harry, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth as if waiting for one of them to break the silence with something worth hearing. Ron had learned over the years that when Hermione wore that particular look, adventures often followed, sometimes dangerous, often exhausting, but always unforgettable. On the table between them, a smaller book lay closed, its cover unmarked except for a faint, almost invisible pattern worked into the leather. Harry had found it that afternoon while searching through one of the quieter shelves in the library, a place even Madame Pince rarely visited. At first glance, it looked entirely ordinary, but when he'd set it down, Hermione had noticed something odd, the way the firelight seemed to avoid the cover, sliding around it as though the book was a shadow all its own. "That's not an ordinary binding," she had said, her voice quiet but certain. Now, as the fire popped softly in the grate, that little book sat between them like a guest none of them quite knew yet, waiting, patient, and impossibly old. Harry's fingers rested lightly on the arm of his chair, his eyes on the book. "I think it's connected to the founders," he said at last, his voice low. Hermione looked up, her expression steady. "Then it's not just a book," she replied. "It's an invitation." The book lay between them like a silent challenge, its plain cover belying the weight it carried. It wasn't heavy when Harry had carried it from the library. In fact, it was lighter than it should have been, but the way it seemed to absorb the firelight, the way it made the air just slightly cooler around it, gave it an almost living presence. Hermione's fingers hovered just above the leather, as if testing whether it might react to her touch. "Feel that?" she murmured. Harry leaned closer. The air above the book held a subtle vibration, like the faint hum of a tuning fork, so delicate he might have imagined it. Ron frowned. "Feels weird, like when you walk past a suit of armor that's about to sneeze." Hermione shot him a look, though her lips curved slightly. "It's magic, Ron. Old magic. Very old. This isn't the kind you find in everyday charms or potions. It feels deliberate." She set her book aside, folded her hands in her lap, and just looked at the object before them for a long moment. The fire crackled softly, casting shifting patterns across the floor. Outside, the castle was hushed, save for the occasional sigh of wind against the tower windows. "All right," Hermione said finally. "Let's see what it wants to show us." Harry reached out first, his palm resting lightly on the cover. It was cool, almost like touching the surface of water that had been left in the shade. A faint ripple of something, not sound, not sight, but a kind of awareness, brushed against his mind. It wasn't words exactly, but an impression. Open. He glanced at Hermione, who gave a small nod. Together, they leaned in as Harry lifted the cover. The first page was blank. So was the second. In fact, every page seemed empty. No ink, no marks, no faint indentations from a quill, just creamy parchment that looked untouched by time. Ron groaned. Brilliant. We stayed up for an empty notebook. But before Hermione could retort, the air above the pages shimmered. It began as a faint glimmer, like heat rising off stone in summer, but softer, gentler. The shimmer gathered into threads of silver light, weaving themselves into shapes that hovered just above the parchment. Slowly, lines of script formed, delicate, flowing letters that seemed to write themselves in the air before fading down onto the page. Harry felt his breath catch. The handwriting was unlike anything he'd seen, elegant yet powerful, each letter curling as if it held a life of its own. Hermione's eyes widened, reflecting the silver glow. The words, once settled, read, "To the keeper of this record, know that you hold not a book, but a memory. Not a memory of one, but of four. If you would see, you must be seen." The letters shimmered faintly, then stilled. Hermione's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wand. "Lumos," she whispered. The light from her wand didn't just illuminate the page, it seemed to be drawn into it. The parchment drank in the glow, the silver letters brightening as if woken from slumber. Without warning, the room shifted. Not physically. The chairs, the table, the fire all remained, but the air thickened, the warmth of the common room replaced with a still, weighty presence. And then, they weren't in the common room at all. The transition was so smooth, it felt like the natural next step in breathing. One moment they were seated around the low table, the next they stood in a vast, echoing hall they had never seen before. The walls soared high into shadow, lit only by the soft gleam of candle sconces that seemed suspended in midair. Beneath their feet, the stone was polished smooth, worn by centuries of steps. 4 great chairs stood at the far end of the hall, each carved from a different wood, each inlaid with the crest of one of the Hogwarts houses. Behind them hung enormous banners, crimson and gold, green and silver, yellow and black, blue and bronze. Ron's voice was barely a whisper. This is them. This is where they sat." From somewhere unseen came the sound of a quill scratching. A desk appeared in the center of the hall, and behind it, a tall figure in deep crimson robes, Godric Gryffindor himself, sat writing in a heavy tome. The lines of his face were proud, yet kind, his eyes sharp with intelligence and warmth. Hermione's hand found Harry's sleeve. "We're watching a memory," she breathed. Gryffindor paused in his writing, glancing toward the others, who now emerged from shadow. Helga Hufflepuff, with her open, welcoming smile. Rowena Ravenclaw, her eyes alight with quiet calculation. Salazar Slytherin, tall and composed, his gaze steady and unreadable. They spoke in low tones, their words echoing faintly through the hall. It was not about the founding of the school, nor any battle or feud, but about a shared project, something secret, something they were determined to protect. And then, as if sensing they were not alone, Rowena's eyes lifted, and for the briefest instant, Harry felt her gaze meet his across the centuries. The hall dimmed, the figures faded, the hum of the magic softened, and in the blink of an eye, they were back in the common room, the book resting innocently on the table, its pages now blank once more. Ron exhaled, long and slow. Tell me that wasn't real. Harry looked at the book, his heart steady but his mind alive with questions. It was real, he said quietly, and I think it was just the beginning. The fire in the common room had burned lower, its glow reduced to a deep, steady ember light. Outside, the wind sighed through the cracks of the high tower, carrying the faint rustle of the castle's night. The book still sat between them, closed now, but carrying an almost palpable sense of expectancy, as though it knew there was more to tell. Hermione leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the plain leather cover. That wasn't an ordinary memory, she said, her voice low. That was something layered. It was like it knew we were there. Ron sat back in his chair, brow furrowed. Yeah, well, it looked like she knew we were there. Did you see Ravenclaw? She looked right at us. I'm not sure I like the idea of people from 1,000 years ago staring back. Harry's eyes stayed on the book. I think she wanted us to know they saw us, he said quietly, like a sign. Hermione chewed her lip for a moment before standing. There's something else, she murmured. Without waiting for a reply, she crossed the room and dug into her bag, pulling out a roll of parchment and her wand. Ron groaned softly. Here we go. She ignored him, laying the parchment on the table beside the book. When we were wherever that was, I noticed the banners behind the founders. They weren't just the house crests. There were symbols worked into the designs, very faint, but they were there. Harry remembered it too. Tiny, intricate shapes embroidered along the edges, almost lost in the folds of the fabric. Hermione touched her wand to the parchment and whispered, Revelio. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, delicate lines began to appear on the page, drawn in shimmering ink. 4 shapes took form: a lion, a serpent, a badger, and an eagle, but each was surrounded by a ring of runes and small sigils. These, Hermione said, tracing one with her finger, are location markers, ancient ones. They're meant to be read only in the place they were created. Ron sat up straighter. So if we find that place, we find the diaries, Hermione finished softly. The 3 of them exchanged a look. The air in the common room felt a little heavier, though the fire burned no differently. Harry reached for the book, and without any prompting, it opened on its own. The pages flipped, faster than they should have, until they stopped on a single sheet. There was no writing this time, only an image, sketched in silver ink. A door. Not a door any of them recognized, though it was clearly part of Hogwarts. It was rounded at the top, framed in carved stone, and at its center was a circular indentation, as though something was meant to be placed there. The silver sketch shimmered faintly, and then, to their quiet astonishment, The image moved. The door in the picture opened, revealing a stretch of dark hallway lit only by a series of tiny floating lights. A faint breeze seemed to whisper from the pages, carrying with it the scent of cold stone and something older still, a trace of parchment, ink, and time. Then, as though drawn by invisible threads, letters began to form beneath the moving image. Come while the castle sleeps. Harry's hand rested on the edge of the book. I think it's showing us where to go. Ron gave the door a skeptical look. Right now? You realize it's well past curfew? Hermione closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with quiet resolve. We don't know how often it will show this. If the castle itself wants us to see, it might not wait for a more convenient time. And so, with the hush of sleeping Gryffindors above them, the three of them wrapped their cloaks around their shoulders and stepped carefully into the dim, twisting corridors of Hogwarts. The castle at night was a different world. Quieter, yes, but alive in ways it wasn't during the day. The portraits slumbered in their frames, though a few cracked open an eye to watch them pass. The suits of armor seemed more watchful, their stillness not entirely still. The book was tucked under Harry's arm, but its magic seemed to reach out, tugging subtly at their path. Down staircases that shifted almost reluctantly, through narrow side corridors they rarely used, past doors that stood half open for no reason at all. They descended deeper than Harry could remember, going outside of the dungeons. The air grew cooler, the scent of the lake faint in the distance. Finally, they stopped before a wall of solid stone. There was nothing remarkable about it. No carvings, no seams, no sign it was anything but part of the foundation. Hermione stepped closer, her wand light brushing over the surface. "It's here," she whispered. "It's just hidden." The book seemed to confirm her words, glowing faintly in Harry's hands. He pressed it to the wall, and immediately the stone rippled under his touch, a slow, liquid shift, like water disturbed by a pebble. Shapes emerged, 4 faint outlines, each the crest of a Hogwarts house, arranged in a circle. As they watched, the crests began to glow one by one, red, yellow, blue, green, until the circles shone like a small sun. Then, with a low, gentle sigh, the wall slid away, revealing the door from the drawing. It was just as they'd seen, the round arch, the carved stone, the empty circular space in its center. But now, standing before it, they felt the weight of its age, the way the air seemed thicker here, the magic denser. The book in Harry's hands trembled faintly, as though urging them forward. Ron glanced between them. "All right, so what's the betting? We open it and fall into a pit of spikes, or it just politely lets us in?" Hermione shot him a look, but her voice was steady. "We'll need to find whatever fits into that space. This isn't just a door, it's a lock, and a key, and a test." Harry traced the indentation with his fingers. Cold, perfectly smooth, and in that moment, he felt certain that whatever lay beyond it wasn't meant for just anyone. Somewhere deep in the walls, the sound of stone shifting echoed softly, like the castle itself breathing. They stepped back, the door still closed, the mystery deepened, but the path now opened before them. The door loomed before them, ancient and unmoving, its carved arch catching the faint gleam of their wand light. The circular indentation at its center seemed to hold the entire weight of the mystery, an empty eye waiting to be filled before it could see them and let them through. Hermione tilted her head, studying it in silence. The four crests on the wall, that can't just be for decoration, she murmured. It's symbolic, the magic of all four houses. The key will need to represent them all. Ron crossed his arms. Well, that's not going to be lying around in a broom cupboard, is it? Harry glanced down at the book, still warm in his hands. It hadn't shown them anything more since leading them here, but now, as if responding to his thought, the pages flickered open. Lines of silver text unfurled, curling delicately across the parchment. Seek the echo of their unity. Where four paths meet, the shape will be revealed. Hermione's eyes lit up. Four paths could mean four corridors, or four staircases, or... She stopped suddenly, her voice dropping to a hush. The Founder's Junction. Harry frowned. What's that? It's a place in the castle I've only read about, an intersection deep inside the oldest part of Hogwarts, where all four of the Founder's original passageways used to meet. Some of them have been sealed off for centuries, but if it still exists... She trailed off, clearly caught between excitement and caution. Ron gave a resigned sigh. So, we're wandering off to find a place that might not exist anymore in the middle of the night. Brilliant. Still, he followed without hesitation as Hermione led the way. The castle at night was a labyrinth of shifting shadows. Some staircases moved as they approached, as though intentionally blocking their path. Twice, they had to backtrack when a corridor that should have led deeper suddenly ended in a blank wall. The book acted like a silent guide. Every so often, it would flare faintly with silver light, and the pages would display a simple arrow pointing them onward. The arrows always led to passages they'd never noticed before, narrow stone steps spiraling down into cool air, doorways concealed behind hanging tapestries, crawl spaces that opened into unexpectedly wide corridors. After what felt like an hour, they entered a part of the castle that felt older. The walls here weren't as polished. The stones were uneven, and the mortar between them had darkened with time. The air carried the faint scent of damp earth, as though the castle itself remembered the foundations it had been built upon. Finally, they emerged into a circular chamber. 4 archways opened from it, each pointing in a different direction. Above each arch, a symbol was carved. The lion, serpent, badger, and eagle, each one worn, but still recognizable. "This is it," Hermione whispered, her voice reverent. "The Founder's Junction." At the center of the floor was an intricate mosaic, its colors faded but still beautiful, 4 paths of colored stone converging into a single point. In that center point was a hollow, much like the indentation in the hidden door. Harry crouched, brushing his fingers over the mosaic. "Feels the same as the door's surface," he murmured, cold, waiting. The book began to hum softly, the faint vibration traveling through Harry's fingertips. Its pages turned once more, revealing an image, a single object, small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. It was round, with 4 tiny crests etched into its surface, meeting in the middle like pieces of a puzzle. Below the image, words shimmered, pieces scattered, bound by loyalty, seek them where their hearts still dwell. Hermione's brow furrowed. Pieces? That must mean one from each house. Artifacts tied to their values, maybe. We'll need all 4 to form the key. Ron groaned softly. Of course we will. Their search began in Gryffindor Tower. The common room was quiet. The fire burned low, and the air was warm with the comfort of home. Guided by the book's faint glow, they moved to the far wall where a portrait of a knight in dented armor stood guard. He peered down at them with a curious expression. Ah, he said slowly, seeking what was once Godric's, are you? Hermione blinked. You know about it? The knight gave a small, knowing smile. I have stood watch for many years. Godric's courage lingers here, but it is not mine to give. You must prove it is yours. Before they could ask what he meant, the portrait swung open to reveal a narrow niche in the wall. Inside sat a small golden shard, its surface engraved with a sliver of a lion's mane. Harry stepped forward, but the shard seemed to resist his touch, sliding away slightly. The knight's voice was calm, not by reaching, but by standing. Harry hesitated, then planted his feet and simply met the shard's shifting movement with patience. Slowly, it stilled and let itself be lifted. The Ravenclaw piece was harder. It lay hidden in the library, high among the shelves where dust lay thick and the air smelled of ancient parchment. A riddle awaited them, carved into the spine of a blue-bound book. I fly without wings. I think without mind. What am I? Ron stared blankly. This is Hermione's department. She smiled faintly. An idea, she said simply. At her answer, the book opened of its own accord, and from between its pages drifted a shard of silver blue, etched with a fragment of an eagle's wing. Helga Hufflepuff's piece rested near the greenhouses. They found it buried in the soil of an old planter, guarded by a slow, deliberate enchantment that required them to nurture the plant above it with gentle magic before it would give up the shard. The golden-brown fragment was warm to the touch, etched with part of a badger's paw. The last piece, belonging to Slytherin, was hidden in the dungeons. The shadows there were thicker, the air cooler. In a forgotten alcove, a snake carved from emerald green stone watched them with unblinking eyes. I will yield, it hissed softly, only to one who can see the truth without fear. Harry stepped forward, meeting the gaze of the stone serpent without flinching. It studied him for a long moment before parting its mouth to release the final shard, a deep green piece carved with part of a serpent's scale. Back in the Founder's Junction, they laid the 4 shards in the center of the mosaic. At once, they slid together with a soft click, forming the complete circle from the book's vision. It pulsed faintly with light, red, yellow, blue, green, before settling into a gentle, steady glow. The key was ready, but the book remained silent, its pages still. Whatever lay beyond the hidden door would have to wait until they were ready to face it. The 4 shards lay in Harry's palm, joined perfectly into a smooth, circular medallion. It was surprisingly light, but there was a steady warmth to it, as though it had been waiting for centuries to be held again. The engraved crests, lion, eagle, badger, serpent, gleamed softly in the wand light, their colors muted yet alive, like embers beneath ash. Ron leaned closer, squinting at it. "Looks harmless enough," he murmured, though his tone carried a note of wariness. "Bet it's not." Hermione didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were on the medallion, but her mind seemed far away. "This was made by all 4 founders," she said softly. "It's more than a key. It's a symbol of when they still trusted each other." Harry closed his fingers around it gently, feeling the smoothness against his skin. The castle seemed unusually still around them, as though holding its breath. They stood in the Founders' Junction for a long moment before Hermione broke the silence. "We need to decide how we're going to do this. We could wait until tomorrow night, rest, think it over, or we go now while the castle is still quiet and the path is fresh in our minds." Ron glanced at her. "You're actually suggesting waiting?" Hermione gave him a small, tight smile. "I'm suggesting caution. There's no telling what's behind that door, and it's been locked for a reason." Harry looked from one to the other. "If we wait, we risk losing the chance. This medallion might fade, or the path might seal up again." The 3 of them fell into a quiet, thoughtful pause. The light from their wands pooled around their feet, leaving the edges of the chamber in shadow. In those shadows, the carved crests above the archways seemed to watch them, each founder's symbol waiting for the choice to be made. In the end, it was the book that decided for them. Its cover began to warm in Harry's arm, and when he opened it, the pages once more came alive with silver light. A new image formed, the hidden door waiting. Beneath it, a single line shimmered. "When all 4 stand together, the way will open." Hermione exhaled slowly. "That's it then. It wants us to go now." The journey back through the castle was unhurried, but every step carried a sense of quiet anticipation. They retraced their earlier path through narrow staircases and quiet halls, their footsteps softened by centuries-old stone. The castle at this hour felt different again, not just sleeping, but listening. Portraits kept their eyes closed, but Harry could sense that some of them were pretending. The faint clink of armor echoed somewhere far off, and once they passed a window where the moonlight streamed in, silvering the dust that hung in the air like drifting motes of magic. When they reached the corridor with the solid wall, the 4 crests glimmered faintly in welcome. The stone melted away at their approach, revealing the hidden door once more. Harry stepped forward, medallion in hand. He paused, looking at Hermione and Ron. "We don't know what's beyond this. Once we put the key in, there might be no turning back." Ron gave a half smile. "We've done all right with no turning back before." Hermione's expression softened. "Just promise we'll be careful." Harry nodded. "Always." The medallion fit perfectly into the circular indentation. The moment it touched the stone, there was a gentle click, followed by a soft, rolling sound, like distant thunder. Light began to spread outward from the key, tracing the carvings in the door until it formed a full circle of warm, golden glow. The door didn't swing open in any dramatic rush. Instead, it seemed to exhale, the stone itself shifting with a patient grace. Beyond was a staircase, spiraling downward into darkness. The steps were broad and worn, their edges rounded with age. Harry held the book in one hand, his wand in the other. The pages fluttered open to reveal a faint map, not detailed, just a simple line tracing the curve of the stairs and ending in a single, glowing point. They began their descent. The air cooled quickly, carrying a faint, dry scent of parchment and stone. Their footsteps echoed softly, but otherwise the silence was deep, almost soothing. Every so often, Harry glanced at the map in the book. The glowing point seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat. Halfway down, they reached a landing where the walls were lined with alcoves. Each held an object, some wrapped in cloth, others encased in glass. There were old quills, tarnished goblets, fragments of parchment, so delicate they seemed ready to dissolve at a breath. Ron peered into one alcove. "Looks like someone's attic down here." Hermione's voice was hushed with awe. "These are relics from the Founder's time. Look, the style of the goblet, the carving on that box. They're exactly like the illustrations in the early years of Hogwarts." Harry lingered in front of a small glass case, holding a single dried flower. It was pressed flat between two panes, its petals still faintly golden. The plaque beneath it read only, "From the gardens of Helga Hufflepuff." They moved on slowly, their progress more a careful exploration than a direct journey. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed infused with memory, as though the walls themselves remembered the footsteps of the Founders. At the base of the staircase, they found themselves in a long corridor. The floor was inlaid with a narrow strip of colored stone divided into 4 sections: red, blue, yellow, green, running down its center. The walls bore faded murals depicting scenes of the Founders, not in grand battle or triumph, but in quiet moments. Godric teaching a young student to hold a wand, Rowena bent over a book with a cluster of pupils, Helga serving food in a warm hall, Salazar tracing symbols into the stone floor. Hermione paused before one mural of Rowena. "They were more than just their reputations," she murmured. "They built this place for everyone." The book's glow drew them onward. At last, the corridor ended in another door, smaller than the first, but carved with incredible detail. Vines and runes twining together, tiny creatures hidden in the design. Harry placed his hand against it. Warmth met his skin, as if the door itself recognized the medallion he carried. It didn't open yet, but he felt the sense of something waiting. Hermione touched the carvings, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where we decide if we're ready to see what's been kept hidden." Ron glanced at both of them, then at the book. "If we've come this far, we have to see it through." Harry looked at them, seeing the determination and the quiet curiosity in their faces. He turned back to the door, the medallion ready in his hand. Beyond this lay the truth of the Founder's diaries, and with one last deep breath, they stepped forward together. The medallion slid into a small hollow in the center of the ornate door, its fit so perfect that it seemed to vanish into the design. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a low ho-hum rose in the air, deep and resonant, like the vibration of an ancient bell. The carved vines along the door began to glow with soft golden light, the runes shimmering faintly in shades of blue, green, and crimson. The light spread slowly, as though waking from a long slumber, tracing every curl of vine, every etched creature, until the entire surface was aglow. The door did not swing open with force. Instead, it dissolved gently, the stone melting away like mist caught in sunlight. Beyond lay a round twosper, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with shelves. But these were no ordinary bookshelves. Each section was carefully partitioned, and within each rested a single volume, displayed with reverence. The air smelled faintly of old parchment and lavender, with a deeper undertone of something like rain on warm stone. The light here did not come from any lamp or candle. Instead, it emanated from the very walls, a gentle, even glow that made the chamber feel untouched by time. In the very center stood a low table, carved from pale marble, its surface holding 4 books. Harry felt the weight of the moment settle over him, not with pressure, but with a strange sense of stillness, as though the castle itself had hushed to let them listen. They stepped forward together, their footsteps muffled by a thick, circular rug embroidered with the 4 house crests. Hermione's eyes moved from shelf to shelf, her lips parting slightly. These are diaries," she breathed. "Every one of them is handwritten. Look, some of the spines are marked with initials." She pointed to a high shelf where letters were pressed in gold. RR in fine, looping script, HH in warm, rounded lettering. Ron tilted his head toward the central table. And those? The 4 books lying there were different. Their covers were richly decorated, gold, silver, copper, and deep green, each bearing the crest of a founder. Harry moved closer, his gaze falling on the one with the lion crest and rich red leather. In the bottom right corner, in a neat, bold script, was a name, Godric Gryffindor. Hermione's hand hovered over the blue-covered volume beside it, embossed with the eagle. "Rowena Ravenclaw," she whispered. The other 2 were just as clear, a warm, honey-brown tome belonging to Helga Hufflepuff, and a deep green book with intricate silver tooling for Salazar Slytherin. They didn't open them immediately. For a few moments, the 3 of them simply stood there, absorbing the fact that they were in the presence of the Founder's own words, thoughts penned in their own hands, preserved across the centuries. When Harry finally reached for Godric's diary, the leather was cool under his fingers, but not unwelcoming. The book opened easily, the pages surprisingly fresh, despite their age. The handwriting was strong, deliberate, but not without warmth. To those who find this, the first line read, "Know that you stand in a place we built, not for glory, but for hope." Harry's eyes scanned down the page, the words unfolding with calm clarity. Tales of the early days, the struggle to unite witches and wizards from all walks of life, and the moments of laughter that had made the long hours worth it. Ron leaned over his shoulder. He "He sounds like he actually liked working with the others," he said, almost surprised. Hermione, meanwhile, had opened Rowena's diary. Her writing was fine and flowing, her entries filled with sketches of architectural designs and diagrams of charms she'd crafted. But interwoven were small, personal notes, moments of doubt, quiet pride, and reflections on the students she had taught. "This isn't just history," Hermione murmured. "It's them, their real voices." Helga's diary was as warm as her crest suggested. Her entries spoke of the kitchens, of the joy she found in creating spaces where students felt safe and cared for. She wrote about plants she cultivated for the infirmary, recipes she shared with the staff, and the importance of teaching not just skill, but kindness. But Salazar's diary was different. His handwriting was sharp and elegant, his thoughts precise. Yet there was no venom in his earlier entries, only a deep concern for the preservation of magical heritage and a wish to protect Hogwarts from external threats. The rift between him and the others unfolded slowly in his words, not as anger, but as a painful divergence of belief. In one entry, he wrote, "We were four once, we dreamed as one, but now the dream fractures, and I fear the cost." Ron exhaled softly. It's not what the stories say. It's sadder. As they read, the book Harry had carried all this way, the enchanted guide, began to glow on the marble table. Its pages turned of their own accord until a new passage formed, written in the same silver script they had followed through the castle. "You have found not a weapon, but a truth. These words are the foundation stone of Hogwarts. Guard them well, for their unity is the magic that built these walls." The silver letters shimmered for a moment, then faded, leaving the page blank again. Hermione looked at Harry and Ron, her voice hushed. "I think we were meant to find these not for ourselves, but for the castle, to remember what it was built on, to remember they weren't just legends, they were people." Harry nodded slowly. The air in the chamber seemed warmer now, as though the founders themselves approved of the discovery. He imagined them here, seated around the table, each writing their truths, knowing that someday someone might read them and understand. They didn't take the diaries with them. Instead, they closed each one gently, returning it to its place on the marble table. The medallion, now cool again, lifted easily from the door's indentation and rested in Harry's palm. As they stepped back toward the threshold, the door began to reform, sealing the chamber once more in its gentle, timeless glow. Harry looked back one last time, the image of the four diaries vivid in his mind. They might never speak of this to anyone, but the memory of the founders' voices, their hopes and fears, would stay with them always. The door sealed behind them, with no clang or shudder, only the quiet whisper of stone sliding into place, as if tucking the chamber back into slumber. The medallion in Harry's hand no longer glowed, but it felt content, if such a thing could be sensed. The warmth from the room seemed to linger in his palm. They stood for a moment in the corridor outside, bathed in the muted light from their wands. The castle's silence wrapped around them again, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. Now, it felt like a shared secret, one they were carrying together. Ron gave a low breath and glanced back at the door. Strange, isn't it? All that history, just sitting there, waiting for someone to look. Hermione nodded slowly. And not to change it, not to put it on display, but to remember it, to understand. Harry adjusted the medallion in his pocket, feeling the smooth edges press lightly against his fingers. It's what they'd want, for it to stay safe, and for us to keep what we saw in our hearts. Their journey back through the spiral staircase was unhurried. Wand light curved along the walls, catching in the faint patterns carved into the stone, patterns they hadn't noticed on the way down. Here a feather, there a vine, and once the outline of a badger's paw. Each felt like a quiet farewell from the founders themselves. At the landing where the relics lay in their alcoves, Hermione paused in front of the glass case with Helga's pressed golden flower. She smiled softly and touched her fingers to the glass. "It's still beautiful," she whispered, as though speaking to the flower itself, still alive in a way. Ron lingered by a small wooden box etched with serpents, his brow furrowed. "You think they put these things here for us to find, or for no one?" Hermione considered that. Perhaps both. Perhaps they trusted the castle to decide when it was time. The air warmed as they climbed higher, the faint scent of the upper halls, wax polish, old parchment, a trace of wood smoke from the common rooms, gradually replacing the cool stone smell of the depths. Harry found himself slowing, letting the familiar sensations of Hogwarts at night wash over him. The creak of the stair, the distant drip of water somewhere, the soft sigh of wind through a half-open window. When they reached the Founder's Junction, the carvings above the archways were as still as before. Yet in the flicker of wand light, Harry thought he saw the lion's eyes glint, the eagle's feathers shimmer, the badger's claws shift ever so slightly, and the serpent's head turn a fraction, not in menace, but in acknowledgement. Ron caught him looking. "See something?" Harry smiled faintly. "Just a good night." The corridors above were mostly empty now. A few portraits watched them pass, some feigning sleep, others offering subtle nods. One old wizard in a frame tipped his hat without a word, his eyes twinkling knowingly. By the time they neared the Gryffindor common room, the warm gold light of the torches was enough to guide them. They let their wands dim, allowing the castle's own glow to lead the way. Hermione stopped just before the portrait hole. "We should promise," she said quietly, "that we'll keep this between us. At least for now. The more people who know, the more risk there is." Ron gave a half grin. "Our lips are sealed. For once, I don't think I could even explain it properly." Harry met their eyes in turn. "We'll keep it safe, just like they wanted." Inside, the common room was empty, save for the faint embers but glowing in the fireplace. The warmth and quiet wrapped around them instantly, and Harry felt a soft weight lift from his shoulders. They sank into the armchairs nearest the fire, without speaking, each lost in thought, the flames painting their faces with gentle gold. For a long while, they just sat there, listening to the faint crackle of burning wood. The medallion lay in Harry's pocket, the Founder's words in his memory, and the sense of their presence still faintly in the air. Somewhere deep in the castle, Far below, the diaries rested on their marble table, undisturbed and safe. And above them, Hogwarts itself seemed to breathe, content, knowing that a piece of its heart had been found and cherished. The fire in the common room had burned low, its glow softened to a gentle halo in the hearth. Shadows from the armchairs stretched across the floor in long, drowsy shapes, and the only sound was the quiet, rhythmic crackle of a log settling into embers. Harry let his head fall back against the chair, eyes half closed, the warmth of the room seeping into his bones. Across from him, Hermione had curled her legs beneath her, her gaze distant but peaceful, while Ron sat with his feet stretched out toward the fire, his breathing slow and even. They didn't need words. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken knowledge of what they had seen and what they now carried. Somewhere in the depths of the castle, the Founders' diaries rested once more in the golden glow of their secret chamber, the medallion's magic slumbering until it was needed again. Harry thought of Godric's bold handwriting, Rowena's intricate sketches, Helga's warm words, and Salazar's careful, measured reflections. The Founders were more than names carved into house crests. They were voices, thoughts, and feelings, preserved like a quiet heartbeat beneath the school they had built. Outside, the night was deep and still. The wind whispered faintly against the windows, and the soft ticking of the old clock by the fire marked the gentle passage of time. Hogwarts, too, seemed at rest, its halls quiet, its stones holding their centuries of secrets with patient care. Harry let his eyes drift closed, knowing the castle would keep watch over them. He felt a sense of quiet reassurance, as if the Founders themselves were standing unseen nearby, their presence woven into the very air. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was the flicker of the firelight against the common room walls, dancing like the glow of magic lingering in the corners of the night. Somewhere far below, in that hidden chamber, the diaries waited. They had waited for centuries, and they would wait for centuries more, until the next time Hogwarts decided someone was ready to hear its oldest truths. And so the castle slept, the students slept, and the magic slept. But all of it, somehow, still watched over them.